Two of the most powerful influences in our world today are science and religion. And of course, the question is, how does science and religion relate to each other? I'm joined today by Dr. A.J. Roberts, a virologist, a molecular biologist, and a Christian to help me answer that question. And I know, A.J., that you've given quite a bit of thought to this question. And Ian Barber, the late Ian Barber, had 4 models for how science and religion relate to each other. Could you lay out those 4 models for us and then maybe give us an example of a few people that ascribe to the different models?
So the first model is probably the one that most people are familiar with and they think of first when they think of science and religion. And that model is one of conflict. Conflict is basically conflicting truth claims about science and religion. And those that would espouse the position of conflict or exemplify that would be people like Carl Sagan, the new atheists, if you know them by name, and then probably also from the other side, people that take the scriptures rather literalistically. So we would call them, or Ian Barber calls them, biblical literalists. So that would be the conflict, and those would be the proponents of conflict. Independence would be the second one. And independence is actually something that was possibly first proposed by Stephen Jay Gould. And Stephen Jay Gould said that science and religion each have separate domains of knowledge. And in each of their domains of knowledge, they're the principal authority. And he actually coined an acronym, NOMA, N-O-M-A, which stands for non-overlapping magisteria. And that basically means that science and religion each have their domain of knowledge and authority. The third way of relating the two, according to Barber, is something called dialogue. And Barber sees dialogue as an indirect interaction between science and faith. He sees it visible in the methodologies that are employed in science and theology. Very similar methodologies are employed in both. And he also sees it at the point that he calls boundary questions. And boundary questions are those kinds of questions that science raises but can't answer directly. Questions like, why is there order in the universe? Or what is the purpose or meaning of life? Or why are there individuals that can actually ask questions about why the universe is the way it is? So those are boundary questions. That would be one other way that science and religion relate through dialogue. Barber himself actually adopted a relationship of dialogue. I think that most of the scientists that I've experienced in my research years and time in graduate school and postdocing and after that would have adopted a position of independence, but they also would probably give nod to a position of dialogue where there are sort of these indirect interactions between the two. So I would put most scientists as proponents of independence and some as proponents of dialogue as well, as long as they're asking questions that seek some kind of conversation between religion and science. The fourth method is one of integration, and that's a direct interaction between science and religion, where they're informing one another. They're basically directing the kinds of scientific questions you might be asking or the ways that you would pursue particular types of scientific research. But it's also informing what we know about the natural world, and that might have an impact on the way that we interpret particular scriptures. So it's a direct interaction. And in the integration model, it's actually seeking a coherence between reality and in science and reality in theology, and not just a coherence, but a correspondence to reality.
So then who would be a proponent of the integration model?
So integration, I actually think, is at the heart of what most of you and your colleagues do at Reasons to Believe. I find myself in the camp of integration. I think really anybody that's seeking a coherent worldview, that's taking both the book of nature and the book of Scripture seriously and wanting to find harmony between those two would be somebody that's seeking integration.